Ladies and gentlemen, let's Red Gaming Titcom video. We're going to be discussing recent interviews from AMD regarding PC, PlayStation 4, and of course Xbox One. Their thoughts on the current marketplace, gaming, game porting, and a lot more besides. This is going to be quite a big interview series. This is from several interviews that have actually been conducted, so this is going to be like an amalgamation of them. And of course we're going to be doing some analysis of this as well. So without further ado, let's jump in. So we're going to start with the Xbox One, PlayStation 4 and PC. It's fair to say that all three platforms are very similar. All three, of course, are using x86/64 technology. They are running very similar graphics APIs and much more besides. AMD previously has even been quoted in saying that it's no longer even a case of really porting, it's more just simply changing little bits of code to make the most out of the system. So we're going to be hearing from a couple of AMD people on this particular subject. We're going to start with Matt Skynner. Now, Matt serves as the corporate vice president. He also serves as the general manager of AMD's graphic business unit. So he's a man with a lot of information. And he says that PC gaming is alive and well. It's a segment that's growing. Whenever new consoles come out, it gives it a boost to gaming overall because the architectures are similar. It reduces cost, makes it easier for developers to create a game for console and PC. Gamers aren't on console or PC gamers. In my mind, gaming is gaming, and any advance in one area helps things across the board. The new consoles too triggered a rush in game engine development, and I think anytime developers are spending new efforts and focus on designing new engines, then of course they're going to release PC games that feature these new technologies. A couple of years ago, when we saw how the console things were going to shake out, we thought, how can we have a leverage this to make a better Radeon gaming solution across the markets? Also, as you may know, when consoles are first launched, games are first developed on console and then ported to PC. Because our architecture is there, it's easy to port the games, and because they're first developed on our hardware, there should be a performance advantage. They should run better on our hardware, so if you can create that platform advantage on the PC from a graphics point of view, then we can give our customers a better gaming experience and grow our market share. Meanwhile, Robert Hallock, also from AMD, stated, "It's tremendously difficult to predict where things are going to be in 5 or 6 years' time, but we can talk about the near term with more confidence in the game development industry now uses AMD. Radeon for 6 shipping platforms. These are the Nintendo Wii, Wii U, Sony PlayStation 4, Xbox 360, Xbox One, as well as the PC. For 5 of these 6 platforms, Radeon is the only choice in a development process. And coming to this latest generation, our flagship graphics core Next architecture is a common fabric for any games developer looking to publish. So it's a bit oblivious to believe or assert that the situation will have a positive and obvious effect on the overall level of optimization games demonstrate for AMD architectures." So out of quote for a moment, let's just discuss this amongst ourselves. So I think it's fair to say that PC gaming had been kind of weak actually, especially during the early days of the Xbox 360 PS3. I think that's not really a surprise to anyone, and I think we're all pretty confident that that's the case. But as both representatives of AMD have stated, this isn't the case anymore. We're getting situations where, thanks to AMD's architecture, and this is going to benefit folks such as myself, by the way, who are using the video cards as well, just invariably, it's going to mean that we're going to be getting much better ports for PC. And several games developers, have already stated that PC now is the leading platform for the development. As it just so happens, it's kind of the middle ground. It shares similarities in terms of the software code for PS4 and Xbox One, and therefore developers are saying, okay, well, we're going to use the PC as the lead platform, and then we're just going to change and tweak accordingly for whichever platform we're developing for. Now, obviously, each developer is individual. I'm sure there's still going to be exclusive PC games. I'm sure there's still going to be exclusive, Xbox or PlayStation games or console games or whatever. But it's certainly going to make the platform a lot more appealing to developers. It's also, of course, going to really benefit indie developers. Now, Mark Cerny, for example, just the other day was speaking about one of the primary reasons that they went with the design of the PlayStation 4. And it's really about encouraging people to develop on the platform. There were other, reasons as well. They obviously wanted a very powerful platform and system, but they realized that they need to make sure that the system is open and accessible. In other words, if you could develop a game on a PC, you could develop it on the PlayStation 4 in theory. And so AMD are there to try and help facilitate that. Now, AMD were also asked how deeply were they involved in the design of the APU as well as the overall architecture of the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. Now, Robert Halleck also responded on this comment and said, choosing AMD over NVIDIA is an obvious choice for a consumer electronic device. We offer x86 and powerful state-of-the-art GPU solutions in a single chip with our accelerated processing units, also known as APUs. This is the console makers demanded, and only AMD have the ability to deliver on that demand. With respect to our level of development, the design of the APUs in these consoles was collaborative. AMD are keen to push things. For example, they also stated that you'll notice that the designs are very high in performance and very capable, and that delivers a user experience that's different from what you can get the last generation. I think you'll see a lot of the acceleration of games development as this generation of consoles launch, and that will extend over a number of years. So I would say that the games console is a very good market to continue to be driven by technologies, and that's why we're so excited about the market. So, in case you're not that familiar with the designs of both the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, I'm assuming most of you who are regular viewers are, but of course, the architectures of both systems was semi-custom. I mean, there were, of course, the standard device, and AMD and NVIDIA both Sony and Microsoft both went with off-the-shelf components in some ways, but then they decided to change things. We know that, for example, they put two AMD Jaguars together. For example, they've changed the way the GPUs work. Of course, the actual APU is hugely different. So, of course, AMD have the expertise to do this, right? The problem with NVIDIA, they don't really have the robust APU architecture that AMD did. Now, Mark Cerny, in a previous interview, stated that when he was looking at the x86 architecture, one of the reasons that he was really focused upon it, other than the fact that it was a lot easier to program for because of much better libraries, for example, that were readily available, and instructions, for example, on the CPU, but one of the other benefits of it is quite simple. You're afforded much easier and cheaper development, plus as well you have more manufacturers who are capable. Of course you have Intel and so on. The problem is Intel with, for example, the Larrabee chipset, and of course they've got others as well, for example various Atom range processors NVIDIA have, for example Tegra. They've got, of course, the GeForce range, and GeForce, for example, was synonymous with the PlayStation 3. The PlayStation 3 ran with the GeForce range GPUs. The Xbox, the original Xbox from Microsoft, that also had a GeForce range card in it. But the problem is they didn't have a device that was kind of all-in-one. And since the PlayStation 4 in particular wanted to pursue compute, one of the main things about this is they needed a tight integration with the whole CPU and GPU so that, of course, you can help to facilitate parallel computing, which is, I'm sure most of you know, but I'll just go into it real quick. The process of basically the CPU saying, okay, GPU, you're better at handling this than I am, so I'm going to pass you this instructions. And of course, this is where some of the optimizations from both Sony and Microsoft have come in, with, for example, with the Xbox One's coherent memory and the coherent memory bandwidth that's shared between the GP and CPU, as well as the PlayStation 4, of course, with its Humor ESCA architecture, which of course is like the 176 gigabytes per second of 8 gigabytes of GDDR5 memory, and all of this has helped to facilitate that. Sony and Microsoft and AMD, of course, have worked really well together in there. Now, one thing that AMD will not talk about, and they basically have said that they are not willing to discuss which of the two architectures offers more performance. Obviously, deep down they know, but they're not going to say, well, X offers better performance than Y, because it would be not very good for business relations from either perspective, because I have a feeling that even if, say, the company who, they said they're more powerful, they probably wouldn't want to be drawn into those kind of debates. It's just not really good for business either way, so unfortunately, mum's the word, as they would say. Now, another interesting one, and this has been something I've been discussing, is bottlenecks regarding multi-core processing and so on. So the question was, bottlenecks for PCs have been around, with significant hurdles still existing utilizing full-power multi-core CPUs and the connection with RAM and CPU in the RAM and CPU in the system. What currently can you do to reduce the bottlenecks and take full advantage of the power that AMD provides? Now, multi-core programming, this is out of quote for a moment, multi-core programming is a pain in the ass. Back in the day when Mark Cernier's team were looking, they were basically doing like a post-mortem of the PlayStation 3. And it's known that they started to go up to developers and give them like a nudge and a wink and say, what would you like for the next generation of platform? Now, the number one request, as we're aware, is a large pool of unified memory. But one of the other ones, when they were talking about CPU, is they didn't want too many threads. They didn't want too many cores. They said between 6 and 8. I can't remember if it's 6 and 8 or 4 and 8, but it certainly wasn't more than that. They didn't want a situation where there was going to be like 40 cores or whatever. They didn't really want to go like multi-core ARM route. They didn't want situations where they've got like a 16-core processor. They wanted easy to access, powerful cores that were fairly, minimal in number, but enough to spread out the load. There's multiple reasons behind that, but I'm going to let AMD speak for a moment. Programming for multi-threaded platforms is an inherently challenging task, and many PC enthusiasts have probably heard. Therefore, it seems unwise to offer products that explicitly depend on such optimizations. Coming from that perspective, we offer a portfolio that can enable excellent performance regardless of the developer's approach to threading. If the developers happen to be particularly good at it, then our architectures are scalable to accommodate that as well. So what exactly does that mean? Well, the problem with multi-core programming is simple. Oftentimes, and this has been something that developers from, say, Titanfall have said, even in the post-mortem analysis of Killzone Shadowfall, the demo that was shown, it's kind of a pain in the ass, because what you have to do is basically figure out what your engine is good at, and then usually there's like an orchestrator thread, which is, you can consider like the master thread, and the purpose of that, this is, what a lot of developers do. I'm not saying this is like the only way to do it, but what they'll do is they'll say, okay, this thread handles like the basic code, and it tells the other threads, the other processors, what to do. Now, multi-core threading, this is one of the reasons that AMD has been losing to Intel in terms of the raw performance race on the PC for quite some time. Now, if you actually do a little bit of analysis on this, and I'm not going to do so in this video, but you can, do a little bit on your own. I'll give you a couple of examples. Crysis 3, Far Cry, and some others. You can Google it. There are benchmarks and stuff on this. So you can see that titles now are starting to get better with multi-cores compared to what they were. But we're no longer at the point where, we're not at the point where multi-core development is simple. I have a feeling, from the perspective of reading various commentaries from developers, as well as just some common sense, AMD kind of know that multi-core processors, because obviously you've got 8 processors inside the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Technically, 1 to 2 of those processors is taken up, so you can effectively say that 6 CPUs are available to developers. So you can really say that 6 to 8 core PCs are really going to become much more common, I think, in terms of gaming. I think that AMD are going to become a very good force in that regard. I'm not necessarily saying that, per clock they're going to beat Intel, but I think it's going to become a lot easier and maybe cheaper for games development as well, which in my opinion is a really good thing, of course. It's never bad. Now, on the subject of APUs, one of the problems with typical APUs is that the inbuilt GPU sucks. It's somewhat lackluster. And AMD have been pushing this. Now, one of the questions that Forbes have asked is quite simple. They said, well, I know that you're not here to really focus on APUs, but I'll ask this anyway. I recently benched the A10 at 6800K and was impressed with what's there. They won't replace dedicated GPUs just yet, but do you envisage a future where APU can deliver high-quality 1080p gaming on PC, especially considering they've achieved semi-custom APUs for the PS4 and X1? And he replied back, what I'll say is we have some great APU solutions, the best graphics in the world on those solutions. Just to clarify, out of quote for a moment, he's referring to that they currently have the best graphics performance with APUs as is. And go back into quote, we can offer further benefits when you leverage discrete graphics to offer dual graphics. I think we're going to see our APU performance continue to improve as we go forward. And the reason we could do so is because we're leveraging technology from our discrete GPUs. Now I'm going to do a quick analysis just to clarify what he means by that. Dual GPUs is pretty simple. The idea is crossfire, right? So you have two GPUs, whatever they are, and they basically work in tandem. So one of the theories, and this has been something that AMD have kind of teased for a while, but they've not really gone super into detail into it, at least yet, and that's that they want an APU in your system, but then if you want better graphics, you can just go ahead and buy another Radeon card. The idea is that both systems will work in tandem and they'll basically give you much better performance. So, for example, the APU that's tied on to the CPU, the GPU that's tied on to the CPU, so the APU component, that'll be able to do stuff like, for example, physics or AI or whatever. But then the discrete card could take over 1080p gaming. Now, it's fairly simple and fairly easy to say that 1080p gaming for most GPUs on most games, and that's the caveat, high-end cards. So, for example, the higher-end GTX 600 range or the higher-end 7000 range from AMD. Just for example, the 7970 or 7950 can easily handle most games at 1080p. There are a couple that struggle with, of course, very high level. For example, Crysis 3 could be a pain in the butt. But that's about it. Most games, no problem. We're talking, 100 frames a second in quite a few games if you've got a decent GPU. So we're okay, but obviously the next generation of console games is going to improve on this because we're going to be seeing much higher quality textures from the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 era. We know that the PS4 and X1 obviously aren't going to be able to compete with the GPUs of a dedicated PC. We do know from the developers of, for example, Call of Duty Ghosts and Battlefield that we're going to be seeing better versions graphically. I'm stressing to add, that doesn't mean we're going to be seeing bigger levels. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be seeing, more levels or better AI or whatever. But we're going to be seeing better graphics if you've, that's just what they've said, the developers of the games. So, don't count me responsible. They've said we're going to be getting better quality textures and or higher resolution, higher frame rate and so on. As far as I understand and remember, don't quote me on this exactly, you can Google, but I believe we're going to be seeing 60 frames per second on BF4 for the PS4 and Xbox One, however. I'm not sure what the resolution is. I believe the current theory is it's going to be running at 720p and then be upscaled. The theory behind that is that right now the graphics quality is going to be kind of between high, medium to high, depending, because obviously some settings or some quality levels obviously raise it more than others. For example, shadows are always very damaging to performance. They can be really damaging on RAM. Damaging is not a word, but take up a lot of resources is probably a better way to put it. So what are my thoughts on all of this? Well, obviously there's still a hell of a lot that AMD can't quite give us in terms of information. We know that AMD, of course, are going to continue to remain pretty silent on a lot of this stuff because, well, it's not good for business. But what is quite clear is that in their mind, the next generation of consoles and PC development is going to become a lot tighter. That doesn't necessarily mean anything bad if you've got, for example, an Intel CPU and a GeForce graphics card, which actually is me, so hi. But I think that we're going to be getting much better multi-core performance. This is my own personal point of view, by the way. In terms of CPUs and my overall feelings of philosophies regarding the PC, I actually prefer AMD. I prefer their ideas for the future of the PC. I think that Intel's stuff is looking to be a little bit restrictive. I'm hoping, and obviously hope does not equal to is, but I'm hoping that Intel aren't dominant in the future. I'm not saying that I want them to lose or anything like that, because that's stupid. But what I do want is AMD to be much more competitive in terms of performance. Directly, obviously, that we know that there's going to be next generation of CPUs as well from AMD. Traditionally, they've been a little bit behind for a while now, which is a shame because they were pretty much kicking ass with the early Athlon and Athlon 64s, for example. Intel actually had to get some help from AMD in regards to the 64-bit extension. So it's kind of a weird thing. AMD really seem to be on the forefront on some of these designs, but they still seem to be lacking something. As for their GPUs, it's kind of anyone's ballgame right now. We know that both AMD and NVIDIA are working on next-generation stuff. So I guess we're just going to have to see, is really what it comes down to. Anyway, that's just about it for this particular video. Hopefully you've enjoyed the discussion. Obviously, there's a hell of a lot more to learn, but still, I'm going to get going for this particular part, so I will see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.